All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PNP Live. My name is Bashan. I am part of the event staff at Politics and Prose. Before we do get started with our event, just have to go over a couple items. The first being that at any time during this event, if you would like to ask a question of either of our authors, we would ask for you to place your question in the Q&A box, separate from the chat section, so we can help facilitate the question and answers. Separately, if you would like to purchase, excuse me, a copy of the Ghost Variations, you can go to the chat section where you will find a link which will take you directly to the Politics and Prose website. We, of course, highly encourage and thank you for any purchases you make today and any day. Ghost stories tap into our most primal emotions as they encourage us to confront the timeless question, what comes after death? Here, in tales that are by turns scary, funny, philosophic, and touching, you'll find that question sharpened, split, reconsidered, and met with a multitude of answers. Kevin Brockmeier is the author of the memoir, A Few Seconds of Radiant Film Strip, the novels, The Illumination, The Brief History of the Dead, and The Truth About Celia, the story collections, The Ghost Variations, Things That Fall from the Sky, and The View from the Seventh Layer, and the children's novels, City of Names and Grooves, A Kind of Mystery. His work has been translated into 17 different languages, and he teaches frequently at the Iowa Writers Workshop. Mr. Brockmeier will be in conversation with Karen Russell, author of several works of fiction, including Swamplandia, Orange World, Vampires in the Lemon Grove, and most recently, Sleep Donation. Without any further ado, the floor is yours.
All right, we're back. Thank you guys so much for having us again. Thank you all for coming in this blurry season, which I think is sort of, there's a thaw happening here in Portland that feels literal and figurative, and very appropriate for Kevin Brockmeier's ghost birthday. I've been thinking a lot about what a wonderful writer and friend Kevin is, preparing for this conversation.
Uh-oh. Karen, can you hear me? Politics and Prose, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Let me see if we're having some issue here. Ms. Russell's feed. Well,
we had a chance to speak 6 months ago.
I'll try to get her just rejoin. Apologies to everyone viewing.
Oh, that's okay.
There we go.
All right, you're back.
I'm back. Oh no, that was like my Beckett play. I think I just staged my one-woman Beckett play. I don't know what people heard. It was a Valentine to Kevin. And it's so strange not to be able to see the people that we just take on faith are out there. This is like the most haunted format, I think, for a book like The Ghost Variations. Kevin, what did I miss from what I said? How far did
you talked about the thaw in Portland,
yeah,
and then you froze up.
And then I froze. Oh no. Okay, well, I don't want to risk it. I want to hand the mic off to our genius author and my very, very good friend, Kevin. I was just going to tell them something that's not publicly available knowledge about you. Kevin made it when we did this event before. Kevin is like a rigorous list maker. He's actually the only one I can see, so it feels strange to refer to him in the third person right now. But, and I think, you know, I feel like I always disappoint you a little bit, Kevin, because I can't choose a favorite among your books. And I can't choose a favorite from this new anthology. You're going to see, if you haven't had the deep pleasure of reading The Ghost Variations, it's a 100-way tie. Which is strange to imagine 100 ghosts all like arriving at the finish line at the same time. It's just really astonishing, and I have had the pleasure also of kind of watching it come into being. And I thought briefly about maybe embarrassing Kevin by reading, and these are private correspondences, so I won't do it. But writers including Carmen Maria Machado, Lauren Groff, Garth Greenwell, basically this phantom, it's a secret fan club Kevin doesn't know about, where we all just bow in awe to his vision. And I read a review preparing for this. I thought this was so beautiful and so true. The book's central idea, it seems, is that death is a permeable membrane. Indeed, it's here crossed casually and constantly from every side and in every conceivable way. The dead aren't dead, nor is alive the other half of a simple binary. Instead, Brockmeier's world has a perpetual hum of oddity, a numinous glow. He's a master of defamiliarizing the everyday, of what the Russians call making strange. And this collection of spectral tales is arranged into 11 sections that include ghosts in memory, ghosts in fortune, ghosts in nature, ghosts in love and friendship. Each of these stories is a single page. And there's no comparable work out there. Every single one is a stained glass portal onto a ghostly predicament. Reading them in aggregate feels like wandering through a haunted library. The reader's eyes are part of the magic, reanimating the dead, breathing life into their desires and problems. Its rhythms remind me of the Book of 1001 Nights, where Scheherazade filibusters mortality by traveling on rolling ellipses from one tale to the next. More treasure box than crypt, this House of Spirits is a masterpiece of formal play and deep inquiry. The Ghost Variations returns its lucky readers to the world, more alert to the beauty that envelops us and the paradoxes that bedevil us, which is to say, more alive to life. And that is truly, I think, I read some other review that was like, this is great for people with short attention spans. And I thought, oh no. Or it is maybe actually in some rehabilitative way, because as short as these stories are, everyone is lucky to be able to see the way that Kevin does. I know that there's that Simone Weil quote about how love is attention. I love the way that this book pays attention. And I won't, but the other thing that just to kind of pay Kevin back for embarrassing me in my own introduction, this was the anecdote that I thought I would share with you guys. We taught together in the Iowa Writers Workshop, where I would have starved to death if Kevin hadn't occasionally driven me to buy groceries. And, that's kind of an intimidating place. And Kevin is an intimidating guy. He's frightening, I think, in his brilliance, but also so warm and like, you'll see, now when he reads to you, there's so much, he has so much kindness and a really vibrates at a very special frequency. Anyway, his students adore him, unsurprisingly, and in a confusing homage at the end of the semester, do you remember this, Kevin? They found a place at a mall where they could take a photograph and put it on a cake. So they presented Kevin with a cake with his own face on it. And truly, speaking of the problems that bedevil us, it was a really unexpected, it felt like a riddle we couldn't solve. And Kevin came to me and said, I'm just not sure if I'm supposed to eat the piece with my face. There was really no good solution. It just sat in my fridge for a time while we pondered this. I think it's on the level of many of the predicaments these ghosts face, where you realize there is no simple binary, no yes and no. What's the right answer? To let the piece with your face molder forever in a fridge? Probably not. The other thing I was thinking about was EJ's line when Kevin was a student at the workshop. He said, Kevin Brockmeier knows how to F the ineffable. And I think that is as succinct a blurb for Kevin as I could come up with. So I'll turn it over to you now. If people want more embarrassing and beautiful stories about Kevin, feel free to ask me in the chat. But I know you wanted to read a little bit from this book.
Yeah. Yes. So we've got
What
an
did we
echo.
do? Neither of us ever ate that face piece though, right?
I was going to ask exactly that question.
No, I did. I couldn't do it. How? I mean, I failed the test too. I don't, but I didn't throw it away either. So it might well be in a fridge in Iowa City right now. I don't know.
Well, thank you, Karen, very much. Maybe you can mute your mic. There we go. All right, echo gone. Karen is one of my favorite people. It makes me feel comforted that she is conversing with me today. It was a lovely introduction. You mentioned the idea of formal play, which I think is right at the heart of what I wanted to do with this book. So that's very well observed. You also mentioned Simone Weil, who's an important writer for me. And the quote, as I remember it, is absolutely unmixed attention is prayer. And that's an idea that I think was also at the heart of these stories as well, to attend as closely as I can to the minutest element of a particular narrative in the hope that it would reveal its own sacredness. So it's not just formal play that I was after a kind of sacred play. In any case, thank you for the introduction, Karen, and thank you so much to Politics and Prose for hosting us. Karen and I participated in a similar conversation in October when her latest book, Sleep Donation, was released. We were on the other end of things. I was moderating and she was reading that time around. But what I'd like to do this time is spend a while reading to you from the book, and then Karen and I will engage in some conversation, and she'll draw some questions as well from the Q&A box. So these are all very short stories, all of which find themselves in conversation in one way or another with ghosts or ghostliness or the afterlife, either in its most obvious manifestations or in a more tangential or metaphoric way. So what I'd like to do is read 6 stories from the book. Again, they're all very short. I've pre-selected 4 of them, so I'll read 2, and then the next 2 I'm going to try to arrive at randomly. One of them with some help from you guys who are listening in. And then finally, I'll read the last 2 stories I've selected, and then we'll turn it back over to the conversation. Okay, so the first story I'd like to read to you, earlier, I guess probably a year ago, when Karen and I were discussing this book, and I asked her which were her favorite stories, she didn't tell me that it was a 100-way tie. And she did mention a handful of stories in particular that she loved. So a magazine with which she was affiliated, the Porterhouse Review, wanted to publish an interview between us. And along with it, they were going to include a couple of the stories. And I asked Karen, which stories would you like them to include? And one of them that she named is this one. And I thought I would begin by reading it to you today. It's story number 44 in the book. And it's called Every House Key, Every Fire Hydrant, Every Electrical Outlet. She was a difficult child to manage. Not difficult in the way of most 2-year-olds. She slept soundly enough, enjoyed her baths, was careful with her toys, and kept her socks on her feet. And as for her appetite, it was almost indiscriminate. Even the meals she initially rebuffed, she could be persuaded to reconsider. However, she cried inconsolably when she saw the headlights of certain cars approaching, refused to toddle past the tree in the yard without kissing the bare spot on its trunk, and seemed personally affronted by electrical outlets, swatting at them with her palm and demanding no, stop, before backing distrustfully away. And about those rejected meals, sometimes she would clamp her lips closed when offered a plate of food, tucking her chin disdainfully into her bib. But if you stirred the ingredients, or even just rearranged them a little, she would wolf them down. What she was thinking, it was hard to know, since she lacked the vocabulary to explain herself. No color was so bright, and no noise so conspicuous as the submerged reality her senses seemed to present to her. The problem she perceived, but was incapable of expressing, was that arranged just so, a hot dog, a lump of peas, and a dollop of creamed carrots made a face. And she couldn't see a face without imagining it was inhabited. And of course, she was right. The objects of the world pressed up against the barriers of their faces, staring out of them in dumb captivation. Every chest of drawers, every sneaker tread, every cigarette lighter, everything with the suggestion of two eyes and a mouth hosted a secret visitor. Those visitors were the ghosts of the dead, who had no features of their own, and therefore borrowed the faces of pot lids and wood knots to peer out at the living. They watched them argue and kiss, cook and bathe, read and exercise, and sleep side by side. If only people understood how tedious the afterlife could be, the ghost thought, how starved a spirit could become for motion, activity, fizz, transformation. Maybe they would do something better with their lives. The faces never spoke to the child, never even varied their expressions, but she understood that they were there, awake, watching, and responsive. Some of them she tried to comfort, while others she hid from or spurned. How was she able to guess what lay inside that mute host of haunted objects, you might wonder? But that isn't really the mystery. The mystery is how she decided which of them she was going to love. The next one I'd like to read is, let me find it. Okay. The next one I'd like to read is number 15. It's called The White Mare. This, by the way, is the beautiful cover. It was designed by Kelly Blair. Pantheon, who's been publishing my fiction since the very beginning of my career, has endowed my books with one extraordinary cover after another. And so I'm grateful to them for that, along with many other things. So one of my obsessions, as it turns out, is animals. I didn't know that necessarily when I began writing this book, but I discovered eventually that many of the stories were about animals, and some of my own favorites were. Another of my obsessions is religion. Yet another one is the apocalypse. And this is a story that combines all three of those obsessions. So number 15, The White Mare. A pet medium, famed for her ability to communicate with dead and missing animals, heard the bells on her front door jingle. A man ducked into the parlor. He was dark and brawny, very somber, and to her psychic antennae, neither a cat person nor a dog person. Right away, this marked him as unusual. 99% of her clients could be picked out immediately as tremulous or distraught pet owners who sought her out specifically to make contact with the ghost of a dear lost dog or cat. More unusual still was the hat he wore. A gold circlet shaped to a dozen points and weighty enough to leave a red dent on his forehead. In earlier centuries, or on a more regal cranium, one would have called it a crown. Yet he wore it, she observed, without embarrassment and without posturing. She had not yet introduced herself when he declared that he wished to know the whereabouts of a particular horse. "You are worried," said the pet medium, "that I can see," and asked him for a description of the animal. Curtly, he answered, "White," as if more than one horse of the color were unimaginable. Male, she asked. Female. A mare. The creature, the man continued, was essential to his duties. To his shame, however, he had released her bridle and she had bolted. Worse yet, she was carrying his bow and quiver in her straps. Without her, my work will be impossible, he said, and time is distressingly short. The pet medium put some iron in her spine. She pressed her hands to the table. Of course, she would try her best, she announced, but the voices were fickle. The spirits could be diffident, and she was older than she used to be. Her powers not so formidable. All of this was patter, a mere show, like the heavy eyeliner she wore, the iridescent scarf. Never once had she failed to find an animal she sought. In fact, with barely a psychic nudge, the location of the man's horse rang out in her mind like a gong. She had no need to consult her maps. He would recover his animal at the city park, she told him, grazing on the ryegrass near the smaller of the two fountains. Though at this time of day, she added, with the 7th down to 1 lane for repaving, the trains would be quicker than a taxi. The man fished a few coins from a pouch and said, I thank you. Watching him rise from his chair, the pet medium was graced with a thought that of the many eccentrics who had passed through her door and the many fools she had counseled, he was the most eccentric and the least foolish. The room seemed to flatten as he left it. For the next 15 minutes or so, her candles, crystals, and dream catchers looked like so many silly gewgaws. Then she heard the hooves tattooing the street and went to the door and saw the dark man with his crown and his bow astride his white horse, spreading pestilence with the drop of each arrow. I often have a totem object that I keep on my desk while I'm writing a book, from the very first sentence until the very last. And in the case of this book, it was this object here. It's a 100-sided die called a zocchihedron, which is hollowed out, and there are beans or beads sort of sloshing around inside of it, which is to keep it from just rolling endlessly away like a golf ball. And I thought when I was writing the book that one of the things 100 ghost stories would allow me to do with the aid of this object is to roll the die when I was giving a reading, see what number it presents me with, and read that story. So this is extemporaneous die-based story choice. And I'm going to roll it and I'll tell you what number I got. All right, so it's number 55. Let's see what that is. This is called The Mud Odor of the Snow Melting in the Fields. Karen is expressing joy about that choice as well. She told me at one point that this was one of her favorites too. Okay. The mud odor of the snow melting in the fields. The house is different this morning. Of that he is certain, even if, by different, he is not sure what he means. Slightly too full, that is the best he can do. Everything seems to be brimming out of itself like beer foam. He himself, by comparison, feels flatter, filmier, less real. It is a sensation he associates with dreams, though he is confident he is not dreaming. You can't smell in dreams, for one, and the house smells the same as ever, a shifting potpourri of grocery store paperbacks, bath soap, cooking oil, and hamper must. No, he has to admit, to his usual senses, the house is completely unchanged. It is only to his unusual senses that it is different. If pressed to describe the difference with a single word, he would say that it is ampler. The house is ampler. It possesses a supersaturated quality, a lavishness, an overdying, he would like to say, except that it is not the ink of things he is detecting, not the color or even the appearance, but what? Way back in the darkness of his mind, he feels a little caper of intuition. He pauses. In his blundering, he must have gotten something right. Overdying, supersaturated, ampler, his unusual senses. Maybe that's it, he thinks. Maybe the difference is not in the house, but in himself, his senses. The logic seems sturdy to him, even impeccable. If everything looks the same to his eyes, and sounds the same to his ears, and smells the same to his nose, but is not the same, then he must be using something other than his eyes, his ears, and his nose to detect it. For reasons that are shadowed in obscurity, he possesses a new and mysterious sensory apparatus, one that can perceive, as if by nervous induction, the ampleness of things. There by his front door leans the ampleness of an umbrella. Here in the dining room stands the ampleness of a wine rack. There in his study sits the ampleness of his desk, and on that desk rests the ampleness of a lamp, and beneath that lamp spreads the ampleness of a magazine. Everything swells with the plenitude of its being. Only he and he alone does not. By the time he returns to his bedroom, he believes he has steeled himself for what he will find. He is convinced that he is prepared. And in fact, it is not the sight of his body, still radiating warmth on the bed, that so disquiets him. It is the realization, gradually dawning, that he is capable of exhibiting a sense to which he does not register. One of the other things I was hoping to do with this book when I read from it publicly, this is, by the way, my launch reading, so the first time I've had the chance to do this, is just ask for a raised hand from the audience and see if somebody could give me a number between 1 and 100 as another way of zeroing in on an unexpected story. So what I'm hoping to do is exactly that right now. And we just got from Sarah Berry to all panelists, number 13. That was the very first one I saw. So that's the one we'll try. All right. Oh, okay. This story is called Mira Amsler, which is the name of a girl I actually know who is now 13 as of about a month ago. So it's appropriate maybe that this is the number for this story. All right, Mira Amsler. That's you, says the man seated next to her. Congratulations. And before she quite knows what is happening, the woman with the sheen of moisturizer on her face has been ushered onto the stage. The flash of the cameras creates a blue and green nimbus in her eyes. By the time her sight has cleared, someone has handed her a trophy, topped with an upside-down silver teardrop, its 2 fat arms meeting at the center of its belly. Engraved on the plate are the words, Best Newcomer, and beneath them her name, Mira Amsler. All at once, high in her field of vision, she sees a punch flying at her face. She flinches. But it is only the black grill of the microphone, jutting at her emphatically, like the beak of some predatory bird. Flustered, she says, "This is very unexpected. I didn't prepare a speech. I have to confess, in fact, that I don't quite understand where I am. As you see, I'm wearing my pajamas right now. Also, my hair is cinched back in a scrunchie. But thank you very much," I appreciate it. Though she intends the remarks sincerely, they must sound like self-effacing humor, for a gust of warming laughter accompanies her as she leaves the stage. A voice declares, "We'll be back after this short break with more of the 41st Annual Spirits' Choice Awards." Mira wonders out loud at the announcement. What the what now? The man who congratulated her says this, "It's the big night." What big night, Mira asks. You know, the night, for honoring the most noteworthy recent achievements among the dead and the dying. But I'm not dead, Mira interrupts. And the man says, "Oh, you dear thing, you. You didn't let me finish. Among the dead, the dying, or the soon to have died. The awards cover the entire calendar year. It looks as if you're scheduled to die on," he pages through his program, "July the 7th. Mira's mind is abuzz with questions. The ceremony resumes, though, before she can decide which of them to ask. No sooner does the presenter open his envelope than once again she hears her name, this time for Best Featured Performer in a Cataclysm or Disaster. From all the whoops, whistles, and backpats she receives, she gathers that she was the runaway favorite. At the microphone, she says, "Is this about my vacation? What's going to happen? Should I cancel my tickets?" A few minutes later, her name is called a third time for Funniest Mortal Blooper. The applause rushes over her like a driving rain. And boy, chuckles the MC, is this one a doozy. Let's watch the footage again, shall we? The lights dim and the clip begins to roll. Mira is already halfway up the stairs, but her legs won't take her any farther. She halts there, a few steps from the apron of the stage, awaiting the ravages of her next award. Okay, the next one I'd like to read is the second to last. This is story number 6. It's called A Long Chain of Yesterdays. Another of the book's obsessions is time, and this is one of the stories that orients itself around a sort of fantastic vision of time. Not for the first time, or even the 100th, the bank president stands at his office window at 6:03 on the evening of Tuesday, March the 3rd, 1987. Two birds square off on the other side of the glass, bickering over what looks like a raisin. The sky is as pink as cupcake frosting. Far below him, a delivery truck triggers its horn, an agitated sound that the distance transforms into an adorable beep. The scene is so calming, so toy-like, that originally, for one bare minute, smack in the middle of his life, it suffused the bank president with a sense of inexplicable peace, a bone-deep certainty that everything would be all right. But after the 8th repetition, or the 19th, he noticed that at this time of day, on this date, the horn always beeps adorably. The birds always nip at the raisin. The sky is always a cupcake pink. Thus, the bank president feels overcome, despite the beauty and charm of it all, by the tedium, the invariability. He knows that his ennui is not March the 3rd, 1987 at 6:03's fault, not specifically. Every other moment is just as static. Take 11:24 on the morning of Friday, July the 26th, 1940. It is his older sister's 8th birthday. He is drinking lemonade in the backyard. His elbows are reddening against the picnic table, and a coiled paper party horn is crimping to the left as he blows through it. Or 4:36 a.m. on Wednesday, December 6th, 1972. He is watching the color bars on a hotel TV and crunching the ice from a gin and tonic. Idly, he plucks at the hangnail on his thumb, then strips it loose with his front teeth. The cold of the ice on his lips deadens the sting. Or 3 in the afternoon, on Thursday, August 10th, 2006. He is trekking through the rough after a golf ball when his heart makes a fist around itself. Then he is lying on his back beneath a catalpa tree with a V-shaped trunk. The leaves vary their patterns of lighter and darker green as the wind bats them around in the sunlight. He remembers his pleasure upon discovering, after his heart stopped, that as a ghost, he could revisit any moment of his life as many times as he wanted to. Any minute, though, no matter how extraordinary, will harden into its form if it happens the same way often enough, he soon discovered. Eventually, the bank president worries, he will forget that he is a ghost, that this endless series of repetitions is not his life. Will forget how it felt when things could still happen for the first time. For now, though, he stands once more at his office window. It is 6:03 on the evening of Tuesday, March the 3rd, 1987. Despite the pinkness of the sky, the streetlights have already been kindled, long rows of dots that, for reasons he does not understand, seem to grow brighter the farther away they are. Sometimes I don't remember why it was that I chose to write a particular story. Sometimes I do. In this case, it was that idea near the end of life being a space where things could still happen for the first time. If there's a difference between life and death, like what if that was the difference? And many of these stories attempt to speculate in fantastic ways about what the difference between life and death might be. That one turns out to be pretty melancholy. So I'm going to end with a story that seems to me, at least, to be more hopeful. It's one of, I think, the most sentimental stories in the book. Although I've read from it publicly once before, read this story publicly once before. And when I did, it was at the Iowa Writers Workshop. And one of my former students came up to me afterwards and told me that although I had said that this particular story was the sentimental one, and the story that I read immediately before it was the frightening one, he thought the opposite. He thought that this one was horrifying. So you can tell me whether you think it's sweet and sentimental or whether you think it's creepy and horrifying. It's number 74, and it's called Knees. And after this, Karen and I will chat, and we'll also take questions from the audience. Knees. A bachelor and an introvert with a monotonous data entry job and a wait-and-see attitude toward life is perusing the morning's paper when he discovers, with less surprise than he might have, his first girlfriend's obituary. Complications following, survived by, age 47. Once, long ago, in their morbid adolescence, all white pancake makeup and black eyeliner, she had asked him, if you could pick someone's ghost to haunt you, whose would it be? And he had answered, yours, no question. They were smoking cigarettes at the bare dirt back corner of the high school. Really, she had quizzed him. What if I was like a pissed off ghost? She was pissed off all the time anyway, ghost or no ghost, and he told her so. She frog punched him. Ow, he said. I mean, you're halfway there already. Ow, ow. Hey, wait, I love you, pissed off. And you know what? He meant it. She had the kind of temper that advertised itself in frowns and edicts and bizarre discharges of static electricity, which she was able to deploy on purpose, the way other people deployed curse words. Doggedness was how he thought of it. Doggedness regarding the music she liked and the music she hated. regarding clothing, grammar, politics, everything. And the same doggedness when it came to him, his lips and his fingertips, and the rod-like tendons in his neck. He had never believed anyone would find him attractive or funny. He couldn't resist her. Let's say you're middle-aged and boring one day, she continued, and I've died, okay? You're wearing a blue button-up shirt with short sleeves because you've lost your fashion sense. And you're drinking coffee with too much milk because you've lost your taste buds. Suddenly you see a fly drowning in the coffee. Picture its wings, its black legs. 2 seconds ago, it wasn't there. You have this image of it bobbing up from the bottom of the mug, like an air bubble. But no, it must have fallen mid-flight. Now, so many years later, on an uncommonly cold summer morning, he is sitting at the formica and aluminum table he inherited after his parents died. In his coffee, as yellow as old ivory, is a housefly. Its little black prayer legs making bubbles in the liquid. That whisper tickling your ear, you could swear it's me. But when you turn around, I'm not there. It's high summer, July, but there's a chill in the air. All at once, he feels a jabbing sensation, as if someone has frog punched him. Pop. A knuckle mark rises in the crook of your arm. Then you hear something shuffling around beneath the kitchen table. Knees. You're really saying you love me enough, even all dead and pissed off like I am, that you would bend down hoping to see me? She asked. And he answered, you bet your life. The kiss she gave him tasted like starbursts and tobacco. Even now, as something steals toward him beneath the table, he remembers the flavor of it. Through his khakis, he feels a nip of static electricity. He flinches and looks and loves and is afraid of her. All right, so that is 6% of the Ghost Variations, a collection of 100 stories. So Karen, if you're still there.
I'm still here. I mean, this really is absolutely the most haunted format, isn't it? I apologize, guys. I don't know why my own face is taxidermied like a ghost up there. I keep freezing and cutting out, so I really apologize. It's bad timing.
It happened.
That was a beautiful reading.
Thank you.
And I feel that why would we have to choose between sweet and absolutely terrifying in a Kevin Brockmeier work? I think like there's it's really saturated with all of those flavors. I'm so happy too that, I think it's a real flex that you have written enough stories that you can use that dodecahedron,
Thank you.
That's a pretty impressive, I'll be a skeleton before I have written enough that I can ask the die to randomly select something. I was telling Kevin that we have this random door lock, it's supposed to generate a random code, and without fail, the code is 69. And I feel like we definitely have just like a 13-year-old ghost who's laughing all day.
Yeah.
Haunting our house. So I guess I wanted to ask a question. I think there are some writers with us here. And this was an answer that you gave to a question I had about endings that I found enormously helpful. So I was listening and thinking, I've never successfully written anything of this length. I mean, it's a pretty severe constraint to task oneself with writing something that feels as shapely as a story and is a single page long, and then repeating that 100 times. Many of these stories sort of are thinking through of what does life look like in its endless variation, right? So if you could tell us a little bit about the pressure of the short form on an ending, the pressure, you know, how you came to think of endings in this collection versus sort of other things you've written, longer works.
Okay.
I would, yeah, love to hear sort of like what makes a satisfying ending just generally, and then how, you know, how did your approach to endings change as you worked your way through these stories?
Well, here's what I can say. I'm a dedicated reader of flash fiction, and that's why I wrote a book of flash fiction, because I admire the form so much and find it so energizing. But before I wrote this book, I had never written a flash story. So it was an experiment for me to find out how it was that I should build these stories. And I was trying to develop a theory of flash and how it is that flash might differ from the standard short story. And I came up with what I think are two theories that might not even be complementary. They might be competing theories. But I think they both describe at least my attempt with some of the stories in this particular book. So the first of them is this. Because a flash story is so very short, if it's going to tell a truth, it has to tell a very fast truth, which is to say the kind of truth that people don't need to be educated into understanding, but that they already intuitively understand and that they just need to be reminded of. One reason that I think flash fiction is so well suited to the ghost story or to any form of the fantastic is that fantasy in and of itself is kind of a way of telling, just the form, regardless of the narrative content, is a way of telling a very fast truth. The truth that fantasy speaks to us when we read it is that the world as we usually perceive it is not what the world is really like. All by itself, like that's the truth that fantasy tells. And I think that is a truth that most people intuitively understand. Anybody who's religious, I think, understands that, or anybody who like has a sense of how little we understand scientifically so far about the universe also understands that. Which means that when you wed flash fiction to fantasy, it lends it an immediate feeling of truth. All right, Karen, I think, just kind of popped out. Hopefully she'll pop back in. The second thing I would say about flash, my second theory of flash, and this might have something to do with what Karen was asking me about, is adapted from something Julio Cortázar said in a wonderful book of lectures called Literature Class. These are lectures he presented in 1980 or 81, I think, in Berkeley, California, that were transcribed and were published recently in kind of English language format. So I'm onto the Julio Cortázar bit, Karen. What he does in this book, at one point, he compares novels. He's distinguishing between novels and short stories. He says that novels are like films and short stories are like a photograph, which is to say that one of the pleasures of the novel is a pleasure of prolongation. You get to see how things unfold over time. Whereas one of the pleasures of the short story is that you get only a snapshot and you yourself are left to imagine provocatively what resides beyond the edge of that frame. So my question to myself was, how does this relate to flash fiction? And my theory right now is that maybe flash fiction is not the film and is not even the photograph, but is only that emanation or aura at the edge of the photograph. In other words, it just glances against some kind of truth. Rather than expressing a fast truth, it glances against a truth and hopes that it provokes you into investigating the mystery of it in some way. So that was the best I came up with, like when I was trying to theorize about flash fiction. So I hope that
it's absolutely perfect for this collection, right? That it's an interaction or a fibrillation right at the boundary line. instead of sort of the exigencies of plot, right? And like a different kind of galumphing, structure, the more traditional story, right? Or a novel even, where you're sort of setting off, launching on this great voyage. I sort of, that reminded me of Barth and his theory of the punctum, where it's sort of something that snags your attention and starts to move, right? Something that draws you into the photograph. And that isn't maybe even the focal point of it, but it's sort of what almost perversely attracts your eye.
I like that idea. Do you remember where Barth mentions that?
I'm going to find it for you. It's the punctum, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. But I having just heard you read these, I think that just feels resonant to me. This notion that it's right there on the boundary line, and it's the aura surrounding what you've selected and presented to us. I kept feeling almost like a hologram too, the way it sort of toggles between eternity and time, right? Sort of how terrifyingly brief our lives look when you're considering them from the vantage of eternity. And I know you have written a novel actually where there's a city of the dead.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that obviously that's what it turns out, again, like I discover, it turns out to have been one of my obsessions. Kind of the part of us that addresses itself. Like this is how I like to think of it. I gave a reading once with the wonderful novelist and short story writer, Adam Ehrlich Sachs. And he mentioned Faulkner's idea that all literature is about the human heart in conflict with itself. And he said that his work, on the contrary, is about the human brain in conflict with itself. And I thought, that's nice. And I wondered, like, is there a way I can take that formation and apply it to this book? And I never found I never unlocked that language puzzle quite. But the best I've come up with is that in many ways, this is a book that's about human being in conflict with itself, which isn't to say like human beings, as we usually use the term. But the idea here is that there's a part of us that is material and expresses itself to being, and there's a part of us that's fantastic and expresses itself to non-being. And many of my favorite stories in the book are about kind of the tension or the back and forth between those two aspects of our humanity.
That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
I think a little bit of a follow-up for me, just thinking about sort of the metaphysical, sort of the meta structures in some of your work, and thinking about being and non-being, and that these sort of, which feel quite porous actually in a Kevin Brockmeier work of fiction. It does seem to me, and this is very reductive, but one of the open questions or, the mysteries inside all of, that haunts your whole body of work is really sort of, what if we die and things only become more mysterious, not less? I think most of us have sort of a half conscious assumption that, well, you're going to die and there'll be an afterlife or there won't. And that will simply be that, speaking of like a simple binary. And so there's something, depending on your mood, hilarious or terrifying about considering the mystery simply deepening or refracting. Could you talk a little bit, I guess, about your metaphysics, and maybe also some other thinkers that have informed this book in particular? If you had to do the family tree of other fiction writers, you mentioned Simone Weil, but I'm sure there are, I feel Calvino like in every sentence.
Yeah, I mean, Calvino is my most essential writer when it comes right down to it. And I'm sure Invisible Cities is somewhere in the back of this book as kind of a collection of very short pieces that address themselves to metaphysics in one way or another. In addition to that, if anybody is curious about my broader kind of reading or viewing or listening taste, you should visit my website. And there's a section that's dedicated to the lists I keep of my favorite this, that's, or the others. I'm adding to this all the time. Currently, I'm at I just finished list number 261. Like the last three were my top 5 Stephen King books, my top 5 Stephen King film adaptations, and then what I call my top 10 Stephen Kingless books, which are the idea is that these are books that were published after Stephen King made his mark in the world of publishing, and that seem in some way to kind of owe a debt to the field that he opened up. you know, in the ways in which they approach horror through character. Among the books on that list is Sleep Donation by Karen Russell.
Yay.
So that's a good place to turn if you're curious about like the books that have informed this particular book. There's a particular list on that page of my favorite flash fiction collections. There's another list of my favorite novels about ghosts. Probably the most influential novel about ghosts for me is A Fine and Private Place by Peter S. Beagle, which has been important to me for a long time. He was very young, 19, when he wrote it. And it's about a love story between two ghosts that happens in a cemetery beyond the grave. But I'm going to cut that answer short because I want us, Karen, if possible, to get the time to answer at least one and maybe more than one of the questions in the Q&A box. And we're already approaching the hour mark. So.
Oh, I see that. You know, so I confess now in my continued delinquency that I called you back on a different device. Okay. I can't see the chat, Kevin. So you might have to look in that aquarium yourself.
Yes.
And get a question.
All right. So are you aware of Yasunari Kawabata's Palm of the Hand stories? If so, have they exerted any influence on your own fiction writing? Also, what were the challenges you faced in composing such compressed narratives? And I do know the Kawabata book. I think I even mentioned it. I copied out my lists of my favorite flash fiction collections. Yes, and here it is, like on my top 20 flash fiction collections. Palm of the Hand stories by Yasunari Kawabata. I think that's a beautiful book. I think he's a beautiful writer. In particular, there's a story in that book called The Grasshopper and the Bell Cricket. And that story was in the back of my mind when I wrote a story in my first collection, Things That Fall from the Sky, called The Light Through the Window. When I was writing this book as a way of generating ideas for myself, at one point, I just wrote down the titles of all the stories from that collection and my second collection. So 24 different titles, and used them as leaping off points for a ghost story to see what they would provoke. So the story, The Grasshopper and the Bell Cricket by Kawabata, inspired The Light Through the Window. And The Light Through the Window inspired a particular story in this book called I Like Your Shoes, which I'm sure so far has been the most widely read story in the book because the New Yorker published it in one of their flash fiction series, I guess a couple summers ago. So yeah, I mean, he's a very important writer. And that book is, I think, probably the most important of his books to me. Let's see. Speaking of rigorous list making, this is from Peter Lessler. Hi, Peter. Did you develop a taxonomy of the short story over the course of writing? That is, do most shorts fall into certain formal categories? Does the short accommodate some emotions and themes better than others? Is there a grand unified Brockmeier theory of the one-page story? And I came as close to offering that theory to you as I think I can when I was answering question from Karen.
Guys, everybody should Google our Porterhouse Review interview.
Yes.
Right? Because it's beautiful. If I was a smarter person, I would put it into our chat. But if you guys just Google Kevin Brockmeier Porterhouse Review, there's just gold in that.
Thank you. But what I was saying earlier about kind of flash as a fast truth or flash as a tangential truth, I think probably comes as close as I've been able to come to a taxonomy of the very short story. And if I looked at my favorite collections, I could probably point you to stories that gravitate toward one or the other of those conceptions. See, and Politics and Prose, I think we'll hop back on to let us know when we're out of time. Colleen Rich asks, how did you approach the project? How did you know you had 100 of these stories? Thank you. Angèle Grimion, my good friend, has just left a link to the interview Karen was talking about in the chat box. So I knew before I knew anything else that this was going to be a book of 100 very short stories. That was what began the project for me. The idea that they would be ghost stories came next. When I was trying to figure out what did I think would allow me to generate 100 different stories. That was the best idea I had. So that was where it started for me. I thought, as I always think when I begin a book, that finally, I've made it easy on myself and set a task that I will be able to polish off, no trouble at all. And I'm always badly mistaken about that. Every book is harder than the one before. And this book, which I thought would be very quick in the writing, turned out to be very slow in the writing. And I think it's simply because although all the stories are only 100-page long, or only 1 page long, ultimately I had to come up with 100 different beginnings and 100 different endings that wedded themselves to 100 different conceits. Let's see. Jessica Eastoe, another good friend, says, these stories make me wonder what kind of ghost I'd be. Kevin, if you came back as a ghost, what is the first thing you'd do? That's a great question. And I think what I would do is kind of lovingly haunt the people I value. If the people I love were transformed into ghosts, I would want them to educate me. I would want them to tell me that there's something else beyond this life. So if I were a ghost, I think I would probably try to do exactly the same things. I would manifest myself to the people who valued me and whom I valued, and let them know that this wasn't it. There's something else. So politics and prose, you've reappeared on the screen. I think that probably means we're out of time. There should be a link to purchase the book in the chat box. I hope you'll do that. Like, I'm grateful to Politics and Prose for hosting me and for having hosted me and Karen the last time around. And Karen, I'm grateful to you for moderating, and everybody who is there in the participants box. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you guys so much for coming. Please buy this book. It's extraordinary. And it's I was telling Kevin, it's like smelling salts. It'll remind you that you're alive. And it'll incentivize you to do more with this, which may not be your only life. We'll find out, I guess. Kevin is a treasure. And you should buy all of his books. And it's great to haunt the screen with you, Kevin. Thank you guys so much again. Thank you for having us, Politics and Prose.
Thank you.
On behalf of Politics and Prose, I'd like to thank both Kevin and Karen for this wonderful conversation. As Kevin said, you can go to the chat section, find a link, make a purchase. I want to thank, of course, everyone who's tuned in, so to speak, for this event, and hope everyone stay well read and have a good day.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Bye.